My wife went abroad with her lover so they could get married. Even her 6 family members went with them. When they returned, completely desperate, they asked, "Our house. Where is it?" 10 years of marriage, and I honestly thought I had cracked the code to suburban bliss. You know the kind of life I'm talking about. The one where you wake up every morning, kiss your wife goodbye, head to work like a responsible adult, come home to a decent meal, and maybe catch some Netflix before bed. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram-worthy, just solid, dependable, married guy existence. I had the whole package. Loyal husband who remembered anniversaries, steady income from my accounting firm, a nice 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage, and most importantly, dependable Wi-Fi that never dropped during playoff games. I mean, what more could a guy ask for, right? Turns out, maybe a wife who actually considered me her husband and not some kind of glorified roommate with bill-paying privileges. My wife Clarissa had always been what you'd call career-focused. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, or at least that's what her LinkedIn said, and she traveled constantly. Like, constantly. We're talking 2 weeks out of every month, sometimes 3. Hotels in Chicago, conferences in Atlanta, client meetings in Boston. The woman racked up more frequent flyer miles than a flight attendant with commitment issues. But hey, I trusted her completely. I was the supportive husband, the guy who never questioned why her business trips always seemed to coincide with Italian wine harvest season, or why her suitcase always smelled like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. I just figured she was networking hard, climbing that corporate ladder, securing our future. You know, normal married couple stuff where one person works their ass off while the other person holds down the fort and makes sure the lawn doesn't turn into a jungle. So there I was, living my best delusional life, when the universe decided to drop-kick me straight into reality. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays are laundry days in my world, and I'm weirdly religious about my routines. I was standing in our bedroom, folding Clarissa's yoga pants that she definitely used for actual yoga and not, as I would later discover, for romantic gondola rides through Venice, when my phone buzzed. It was Trent, my buddy from college who now works in IT and spends most of his free time trolling people online for sport. The message read, "Bro, why is your wife wearing a white dress in Italy, next to another dude in a tux?" I'm not gonna lie, my first thought was that Trent had finally lost his mind to those energy drinks he chugs like water. My second thought was that he'd mixed up some random wedding photo with someone else. But then the image loaded, and suddenly the yoga pants I was folding felt like they weighed about 800 pounds. There she was, my wife of 10 years, my partner in suburban mediocrity, my supposed soulmate, standing on what looked like the Amalfi Coast in a white designer dress that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. And next to her, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, was some guy I'd never seen before in my life. He was wearing a tux, holding her hand, and they were surrounded by people I definitely recognized. Her parents Gerald and Linda, her 2 sisters Monica and Beth, her brother Calvin, and even her weird Aunt Patricia who smells like mothballs and conspiracy theories. My heart did this weird flip-flop thing that I'm pretty sure isn't medically recommended. My wallet, if wallets could have physical reactions, probably fainted right there in my back pocket. And my brain? My brain just sat there for a solid 30 seconds repeating the word, nope, like a broken record before finally switching gears to, oh, so we're doing plot twists now? Cool. I scrolled through more photos that Trent kept sending, because apparently this little family vacation had its own dedicated Instagram hashtag. Hashtag Clarissa and Elliot forever. Elliot. His name was Elliot. Elliot the exotic idiot, as I would come to call him in my head, because anyone who marries someone else's wife while she's technically still married is either exotic or idiotic, and I'm going to go with both. There were pictures of champagne toasts, sunset dinners, the whole family clustered together like some kind of deranged Brady Bunch reunion special, and, my personal favorite, a shot of Clarissa's mom Linda wearing white to what was clearly her daughter's second wedding. Because apparently when your daughter commits bigamy, the appropriate response is to dress like you're the bride too. The best part? And I use best here with maximum sarcasm, slathered on thick like cream cheese on a bagel. They'd left me a grocery list. An actual, physical grocery list stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a palm tree that said, "Life's a beach." The list included things like organic quinoa, almond milk, unsweetened, kale, the good kind, and toilet paper, the expensive stuff because Linda's visiting. Linda wasn't visiting. Linda was in freaking Italy watching her daughter marry someone who wasn't me. Oh, and they forgot to pay the electric bill. I know this because I got the disconnection notice that same afternoon, which really added some nice ambience to my complete mental breakdown. I didn't cry, though. I want that on record. I did not shed a single tear over Clarissa and her Italian wedding adventure with the 6 freeloaders who apparently thought destination wedding meant screw the guy funding our lives. Instead, I walked downstairs, made myself a cup of coffee, dark roast, because this situation called for something stronger than my usual vanilla latte nonsense. Grabbed a pen and one of those legal pads I keep for tax season and sat down at the kitchen table. That table where we'd eaten probably 3,000 dinners together, where we discussed our future plans and shared dreams, and all that romantic garbage that people say when they're pretending their marriage isn't held together by Netflix passwords and mutual tolerance. I started writing, planning, scheming, if you want to get technical about it. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It either breaks you or it makes you creative. And I was feeling real creative. Every single thing we owned, every property, every account, every car, every stock portfolio, every subscription to every streaming service. All of it was in my name. Why? Because about 5 years ago, Clarissa had looked at me with those big, trustworthy eyes and said, "Honey, you're so much better with finances. I trust you completely." She trusted me completely. Past tense. Very past tense. I smiled then, when she said it. I remember feeling all warm and appreciated, like I was the responsible adult in our partnership. I laughed now, sitting at that kitchen table, because the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. While Clarissa and Elliot were probably dancing at some sunset reception, clinking glasses and celebrating their true love, I was drafting what history would later call, at least in my mind, the Great Property Disappearing Act. It had a nice ring to it, kind of like a magic show, except instead of making rabbits disappear, I'd be making houses, bank accounts, and comfortable lifestyles vanish into thin air. I took another sip of coffee, stared at my notes, and thought about Monday morning. That's when I'd call Marcus Hale, the best attorney I knew, the guy who'd helped me with estate planning and business contracts for years. Marcus was sharp, ruthless when necessary, and had a sense of humor darker than my current mood. I could already hear his reaction. A low whistle followed by, "Well, this is going to be fun." Operation Vanishing House was about to commence, and I had all weekend to perfect every detail. A week passed, and let me tell you, that week felt longer than every Marvel movie combined, including the post-credit scenes. I went through the motions of normal life like some kind of autopilot zombie, showed up to work, crunched numbers, responded to emails, pretended I gave a damn about quarterly projections, all while my phone kept buzzing with notifications that made my blood pressure spike like a teenager's voice during puberty. See, Clarissa and her merry band of family traders had decided that their little Italian adventure needed to be documented for posterity, which in modern terms means they plastered it all over every social media platform known to mankind. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn for some godforsaken reason, because apparently professional networking sites are now appropriate venues for broadcasting your bigamy. The photos came in waves, each one more insulting than the last. There was the happy couple on a gondola in Venice, with Clarissa looking all dreamy-eyed while Elliot the exotic idiot rode them through the canals like he was auditioning for a romance novel cover. There were champagne toasts at what looked like a 5-star restaurant with a view of the Mediterranean, everyone raising their glasses like they were celebrating something wholesome instead of the complete destruction of a decade-long marriage. Her sister Monica posted a carousel of images with the caption, "Best destination wedding ever," complete with heart emojis and hashtags like #FamilyFirst and #LoveWins. I wanted to comment, yeah, love wins and loyalty gets deported, but I had bigger plans than petty social media feuds. The worst part, and there were so many contenders for worst part that I could have hosted an awards ceremony, was watching Clarissa's mom Linda parade around in these photos wearing white. Not ivory, not cream, not champagne-colored, but straight-up bridal white, like she was competing with her own daughter for attention. In one particularly galling photo, Linda was standing between Clarissa and Elliot with her arms around both of them, beaming at the camera like she'd personally arranged this whole disaster. The caption read, "A mother's joy knows no bounds." Lady, your joy should definitely have some bounds, specifically the ones that prevent you from condoning your daughter's affair while her actual husband is back home paying your cell phone bill. But the real cherry on top of this dumpster fire Sunday was Gerald, Clarissa's father, who apparently decided to take on the role of family spokesman and hype man. This dude was posting multiple times a day with captions that made me want to throw my phone into a wood chipper. Proud of my baby girl for following her heart. He wrote under a sunset photo of the newlyweds kissing. Sir, I wanted to reply, your baby girl followed her heart right out of our mortgage and straight into financial fraud territory. But sure, let's call it romance. Another post showed the whole family at some fancy Italian villa with Gerald's caption reading, "Sometimes life gives you a second chance at happiness. Sometimes life also gives you a first chance to not raise a lying, cheating, morally bankrupt daughter, Gerald, but I guess we can't all be perfect parents." I spent those 7 days oscillating between rage and this weird, cold calculation that I didn't even know I was capable of. My buddy Trent kept calling to check on me, probably expecting to find me in a puddle of tears surrounded by empty ice cream containers like some rom-com protagonist. Instead, he found me stone-cold sober, taking screenshots of every single post, every comment, every like, and organizing them into a folder labeled "Evidence of Absolutely Zero Remorse." Trent asked if I was okay, and I told him I was better than okay. I was focused. He laughed nervously and said I sounded like a serial killer, and I told him that serial killers don't file legal paperwork. They just kill people. So technically I was more like a serial property redistributor. While Clarissa and company were living their best La Dolce Vita, posting pictures of pasta and Prosecco like they were filming a tourism commercial, I was drinking my own kind of beverage, revenge. And let me tell you, revenge tastes absolutely nothing like Prosecco. It's quiet, chilled, methodical, and best served with a side of ironclad legal documentation. Every night that week, I sat at my kitchen table with a growing stack of papers, property deeds, bank statements, car titles, investment portfolios, insurance policies. Everything we'd accumulated over 10 years of marriage. Every single asset that Clarissa had trustingly put in my name because I was so much better with finances. Past me had been responsible and organized. Present me was grateful as hell for past me's attention to detail. The thing is, I never planned to be this guy. I'm not naturally vengeful or petty or calculating. I'm the dude who returns shopping carts to the corral even when it's raining, who leaves good tips even for mediocre service, who actually stops at yellow lights instead of gunning it. But there's something about watching your wife marry another man while her entire family celebrates and posts about it online that fundamentally rewires your brain. It's like a switch flips, and suddenly you're not the nice guy anymore. You're the guy who's going to make sure everyone learns a very expensive lesson about loyalty and legal ownership. By Thursday, I'd made my decision. By Friday, I'd compiled all my documents into a neat folder. By Saturday, I was rehearsing my phone conversation with Marcus Hale, my attorney, trying to find the right balance between "I need legal help" and "I'm about to commit the most justified act of financial retaliation in modern history." Marcus was good people. We'd known each other since I'd helped him with his taxes during a particularly messy audit, and we'd stayed friends ever since. He was the kind of lawyer who understood that sometimes the law isn't just about what's legal, it's about what's right. And sometimes what's right is making sure cheaters don't profit from their cheating. Sunday evening, while the Italian adventure crew was posting their final sunset photos with captions like, "Until next time, Italia," and "Best family vacation ever," I was sitting on my back porch with a beer, watching the sun go down over my neighborhood. My house. My life that I'd built with my own money and my own effort, while Clarissa was apparently building a whole separate life with someone else. I pulled out my phone, pulled up Marcus's number, and stared at it for a solid 5 minutes. This was it, the point of no return. Once I made this call, once I set this plan in motion, there'd be no going back, no reconciliation, no couples therapy or marriage counseling, or any of that hopeful garbage that people try when relationships fall apart. I hit the call button. Marcus answered on the second ring, sounding relaxed and probably slightly buzzed from his own Sunday evening wind down. "Hey man, what's up? Don't tell me you need help with taxes on a weekend." I laughed, but it came out darker than I intended. "Nah, Marcus. I need help with something way more interesting than taxes. You got a minute?" There was a pause. Then his voice changed, sharper, more alert. "For you? Always. What's going on?" I took a long drink of my beer, watched a bird fly across my yard, and said the words that would change everything. "My wife just married another guy in Italy. Her whole family was there, and I need to make sure that when they come home, they have absolutely nothing to come home to." The silence on the other end lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then Marcus started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-on belly laugh that went on for a solid 30 seconds. When he finally caught his breath, he said, "Okay, I'm going to need you to start from the beginning and tell me everything, because this sounds like the most entertaining case I've had all year." So I did. I told him about the Instagram posts, the white dress, Elliot the exotic idiot, the grocery list, the unpaid electric bill, and most importantly, the fact that every single thing we owned was legally in my name. When I finished, there was another pause, and then Marcus said something that made me smile for the first time in a week. "Operation Vanishing House starts Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, my office. Bring coffee and every document you've got. This is going to be beautiful." Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes people post inspirational quotes about new beginnings and fresh starts, which felt weirdly appropriate considering I was about to orchestrate the most spectacular vanishing act since Houdini decided to make elephants disappear. I showed up at Marcus's office at exactly 9 a.m. carrying 2 large coffees, one for him, one for me, and a messenger bag stuffed with every piece of documentation that proved I was the sole legal owner of basically everything Clarissa thought we owned together. Marcus's office was in one of those converted brownstone buildings downtown that lawyers love because it makes them look sophisticated and established, with dark wood paneling and leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus greeted me with a handshake that lingered just long enough to communicate, "I'm ready to destroy some lives today," which was exactly the energy I needed. We sat down in his conference room, spread out all my documents across the massive mahogany table, and got to work. The plan was simple in theory, but required surgical precision in execution. Sell the house, liquidate joint accounts, transfer assets, and do it all legally so nobody could come back later claiming I'd done anything wrong. See, that's the beautiful thing about revenge when you're the responsible one who actually read the fine print and kept receipts. Everything I was about to do was perfectly legal. Morally questionable according to some people's standards? Maybe. But legal? Absolutely. Marcus looked over the property deed first, his eyes scanning the document with the kind of focus that made him charge $400 an hour. "Okay, so the house is solely in your name. Purchased before marriage, never refinanced with her name added. That's clean. You can sell this tomorrow if you wanted to." I nodded, sipping my coffee, and Marcus continued. "Joint accounts. Those are trickier, but since you're still legally married and there's no separation agreement, you can withdraw your portion. I'd recommend taking exactly 50% to avoid any claims of financial abuse." I interrupted him there. "Marcus, I'm not trying to steal her money. I'm trying to make sure she understands that actions have consequences. Take 50%, move it to a new account in my name only, leave her half untouched." He raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Look at you being all ethical in the middle of your revenge plot." I respect it. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for, the one that would tell me if he was really on board with this whole operation. "Aren't you being a little harsh? I mean, selling the house while she's abroad? That's pretty nuclear." I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked him straight in the eye. "Marcus, they took the honeymoon. I'll take the living room. Seems like a fair trade to me." The man laughed so hard he spilled espresso on his expensive notepad, and I knew right then that we were going to get along just fine during this whole process. He wiped his mouth, shook his head, and said, "All right, let's do this. I'll draw up the paperwork, contact a real estate agent I know who can move properties fast, and we'll have this house sold within 2 weeks. Where are you planning to live?" I told him I'd already been looking at apartments downtown, nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom with decent light and proximity to good coffee shops. I didn't need much, just enough space for me and my newfound appreciation for living without liars. The real estate agent Marcus connected me with was this tornado of a woman named Sheila who wore power suits and had the kind of aggressive optimism that probably annoyed people at parties but was perfect for selling houses quickly. She came by that afternoon, walked through every room with the speed of someone who'd seen 1,000 homes and could price one in her sleep, and declared, "I can have this sold in 10 days, maybe less. The market's hot, the location's perfect, and this place is move-in ready. How much are you looking to get?" I gave her a number that would cover the remaining mortgage and leave me with a decent chunk of change to start over. She nodded, pulled out her phone, and started texting potential buyers before she'd even left my driveway. True to her word, Sheila had 3 offers by Wednesday. By Friday, we'd accepted one, a young couple with a new baby who loved the neighborhood and didn't ask too many questions about why I was selling so fast. I told them I was relocating for work, which wasn't entirely a lie if you considered relocating away from betrayal a career move. The closing was scheduled for the following Thursday, which meant I had exactly 1 week to pack up 10 years of my life, separate what was mine from what was hers, and move into my new apartment before Clarissa and her traveling circus returned from their Italian fantasy. Packing was weirdly therapeutic. I went through every room, every closet, every drawer, making piles. Mine, hers, garbage. Most of the furniture I sold to the new owners because, honestly, I didn't want anything that reminded me of the life I'd been stupid enough to think was real. The couch where we'd watch TV? Gone. The dining table where we'd hosted dinner parties? Sold. The bed we'd slept in for 10 years? I briefly considered setting it on fire for dramatic effect, but that seemed illegal and messy, so I just left it for the buyers. I kept my books, my clothes, my laptop, some kitchen stuff, and a couple of photographs from before Clarissa, back when I was just a regular guy who didn't know his future wife was capable of this level of duplicity. The apartment I'd rented was in a converted warehouse building with exposed brick and those industrial-style windows that let in tons of light. It was the kind of place that designers call urban minimalist and regular people call empty-looking, but I loved it. No memories, no ghosts, no reminders of the past decade I'd apparently wasted. I moved in over the weekend with help from Trent and a couple of other buddies who showed up with beer and pizza, and the kind of male emotional support that involves not asking too many questions and making jokes about bachelor pads. By Sunday night, I was sitting in my new living room on a couch I'd bought that afternoon from IKEA, eating Chinese takeout straight from the container, and feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. The house was sold, the money was transferred, my stuff was here, and in approximately 72 hours, Clarissa and her family would return to find absolutely nothing where our home used to be. Marcus had handled all the legal paperwork, made sure every signature was in place, every document was filed, every loose end was tied up tighter than my budget during tax season. But I wasn't quite done yet. See, I have this petty streak that I didn't know existed until Clarissa brought it out, and that petty streak demanded one final touch: a note. I drove back to the old house on Monday evening, let myself in with my key one last time, and stood in the empty living room where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases and all those milestones that apparently meant nothing. The walls were bare, the floors were swept clean, and the whole place echoed in a way that felt both sad and satisfying. I pulled out a piece of paper and a marker I'd brought specifically for this purpose, and I wrote in big, bold letters, "Welcome home, family. Hope Customs didn't confiscate your morals." I taped it to the wall right where you'd see it immediately upon walking in, stepped back to admire my handiwork, and felt a surge of satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy, but definitely felt earned. Then I locked the door, dropped the keys in the mailbox for the new owners, and drove away from that chapter of my life without looking back. Before going to sleep that night in my new apartment, I set 3 alarms on my phone, not because I had anywhere important to be, but because I wanted to be awake when their flight landed. I wanted to be conscious and alert for the moment when Clarissa realized that the life she'd left behind had literally disappeared, that the safety net she'd assumed would always be there had been legally and systematically removed. Marcus called me around midnight, probably from his home office where he did his best work. "Everything's finalized. The house is officially under new ownership as of 5 p.m. today. Your bank accounts are secure, assets are transferred, and legally speaking, you're untouchable. She can't claim anything because everything was already yours." I thanked him, told him his check was in the mail, and hung up feeling like I'd just won a chess game against someone who didn't even know we were playing. Tomorrow, Clarissa would land at JFK, probably tired and jet-lagged and still glowing from her Italian adventure, completely unaware that the universe was about to deliver a karmic reckoning that would make her honeymoon look like a bad dream by comparison. 2 weeks after I'd moved into my new apartment, and approximately 3 hours before Clarissa's flight was scheduled to land at JFK, I did something that probably qualified me for some kind of pettiness hall of fame. I grabbed a large coffee, a bag of popcorn from the convenience store, and drove across town to park on the street directly opposite what used to be our house. I'm not proud of this moment, but I'm not ashamed of it either, because sometimes you need to witness the consequences of your actions in real time, and sometimes you need to watch other people witness the consequences of their actions while you eat snacks like you're at the world's most satisfying drive-in movie. The new owners had already moved in over the weekend, and I could see their minivan in the driveway with one of those stick-figure family decals on the back window showing two parents, a baby, and a dog named, I'm not making this up, Biscuit. They seemed nice, normal, the kind of people who probably had never committed bigamy or abandoned their spouse for an Italian vacation with their sketchy new partner. I felt good about selling to them. They deserved a drama-free house, even if the previous drama was about to show up in the form of 7 jet-lagged idiots expecting to find their home exactly where they'd left it. My phone buzzed around 2 p.m. with a notification I'd been waiting for, the smart home alarm system that was still connected to my phone, the one I'd conveniently forgotten to disconnect before transferring the property. Motion detected at front door. The alert read, and my heart started doing this weird, excited flutter like I was about to watch the season finale of my favorite show. I sat up straighter in my car, adjusted my rearview mirror for optimal viewing, and watched as a taxi pulled up to the curb. Then another taxi. Then a third one, because apparently 7 people and their luggage couldn't fit in 2 taxis, which should have been their first clue that bringing the entire family on your affair honeymoon was a logistical nightmare. The doors opened, and out they came like some kind of deranged clown car routine at a circus nobody wanted to attend. First was Clarissa, looking tanned and relaxed in that post-vacation glow that people get when they've spent 2 weeks drinking wine and not thinking about consequences. She was wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than the taxi ride, and carrying one of those designer bags that screams, I make poor financial decisions. Right behind her came Elliot the exotic idiot, looking exactly like the kind of guy who steals other people's wives. Too much hair gel, shoes that were trying way too hard, and the confidence of someone who'd never been punched in the face, but probably deserved it. Then came the supporting cast of this disaster, Gerald and Linda, her parents, looking exhausted in that way that people over 60 look after international flights, like they'd been personally assaulted by time zones. Monica and Beth, Clarissa's sisters, who were both on their phones probably trying to upload their last vacation photos with captions about family bonding and love conquering all. Calvin, her brother, was struggling with approximately 17 pieces of luggage because apparently 2 weeks in Italy requires more clothes than most people own. And finally, weird Aunt Patricia, who I'd always suspected was slightly unhinged, wearing what looked like a caftan made of scarves, and muttering something about the energy of the neighborhood feeling different. They all stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, organizing their luggage mountain, laughing about something that was probably only funny if you'd just spent 2 weeks betraying someone. And then Clarissa turned toward the house. I watched her face change in real time. Confusion first, then disbelief, then this dawning horror that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deeply satisfying. She pulled off her sunglasses, blinked a few times like maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her, and just stared at the house that definitely was not the house she'd left behind. Gerald was the first to actually move. He took 3 steps toward the driveway, stopped mid-stride like he'd walked into an invisible wall, and turned to look at Clarissa with an expression that clearly said, "What the hell is happening?" Linda clutched her husband's arm, her mouth opening and closing like a fish trying to figure out how to breathe air, and then she literally fainted, just straight up collapsed backward into a pile of suitcases like some Victorian lady who'd seen something scandalous at a garden party. Patricia started waving her hands around, making these weird gestures that I think were supposed to be protective or something, and Calvin dropped 2 bags and shouted, "Is this the right address?" But the real star of this show was Clarissa, who let out a scream that probably scared birds 3 neighborhoods over. "Our house," she shrieked, her voice cracking on the word house, like she was auditioning for a horror movie. "Where is it?" Where the hell is our house? She started running toward the property, her heels clicking on the pavement, and I swear I was gripping my steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, because this was better than any movie, any show, any form of entertainment that humanity had ever invented. Elliot, trying to be the hero in a situation where there were no heroes, jogged after her calling. Baby, wait, let me think about this logically. Buddy, I wanted to yell from my car. There's no logic that's going to make that house reappear. You just married into homelessness. Congratulations, here's your prize. It's nothing, enjoy. He caught up to Clarissa at the driveway, and I watched them both stare at the property like they could will it back into existence through sheer confusion and entitlement. The new owners, God bless them, must have heard the commotion because the front door opened and out came the husband. A guy probably in his early 30s wearing a polo shirt and looking genuinely concerned. "Can I help you folks?" he called out, and I could see him holding his phone, probably ready to call the cops if these lunatics didn't leave. Clarissa spun around and started marching toward him, and I thought, oh no, poor guy just bought a house, and now he's got to deal with my ex-wife's meltdown. "What are you doing in my house?" Clarissa demanded, pointing at him like he was the criminal in this scenario. The guy looked genuinely confused now, glancing back at his wife who'd appeared in the doorway holding their baby. "Ma'am, this is our house. We bought it 2 weeks ago. Closed on Thursday." Gerald stepped forward, trying to use his dad voice to take control. "There must be some mistake. This is my daughter's property. We've owned this house for 10 years. The new owner shook his head, looking more uncomfortable by the second. "I don't know what to tell you, but we have all the paperwork. This is legally our home now. Maybe you have the wrong address." That's when Elliot, in a moment of absolute genius that proved he deserved every bit of chaos coming his way, suggested loudly, "Maybe we're on the wrong street. These neighborhoods all look the same." I almost honked my horn in appreciation of his stupidity. "Sir, your new wife just screamed about her missing house, and your solution is that maybe they're geographically confused? This is the man Clarissa chose over me? A guy who thinks entire houses just change locations like we're living in a Harry Potter movie?" My phone started ringing. Then it rang again, and again. Within 5 minutes, I had 47 missed calls. Not an exaggeration. I counted them later, from Clarissa, her parents, her siblings, even one from Aunt Patricia, which I'm still confused about because I didn't think she had my number. I let them all go to voicemail, watching as Clarissa paced back and forth on the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear, probably leaving me increasingly frantic messages that I had zero intention of listening to. Finally, after the 47th call went unanswered, I decided it was time for my grand response. I pulled out my phone, opened up my messages, found Clarissa's contact, which I'd already changed to the bigamist because I'm petty like that, and typed out the message I'd been composing in my head for 2 weeks. House moved abroad. It found true love and never looked back. Funny how that works. I hit send, watched her phone buzz from across the street, saw her look down at the screen, and witnessed her face go through approximately 17 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, rage, disbelief, and finally this defeated realization that she'd been outplayed. She showed the phone to Elliot, who read it, and then looked around like he was suddenly aware that I might be watching, which I was, very obviously, from my car 50 feet away. Gerald read it over her shoulder, and his face turned this interesting shade of purple that probably wasn't medically advisable for a man his age. I started my engine, took one last look at the 7 people standing on the sidewalk surrounded by their luggage with nowhere to go, and pulled away from the curb feeling lighter than I'd felt in months. In my rearview mirror, I could see Clarissa still staring at her phone, probably rereading my message, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to her life. "Welcome home, family," I thought, turning the corner and heading back to my apartment. "Hope you enjoyed Italy, because that's the last vacation you'll be taking on my dime." The phone call started around 6 p.m. that evening, right when I was settling into my new apartment with leftover Chinese food and a beer, enjoying the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you've successfully executed a plan so perfectly that your enemies are currently having synchronized meltdowns. The first call wasn't from Clarissa, though. It was from some lawyer named Richard Pemberton, who introduced himself with the kind of pompous voice that told me he charged at least $500 an hour and had probably never won a case based on actual merit. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, using that condescending tone that lawyers use when they think they're about to intimidate someone. I'm calling on behalf of my client, Clarissa Hartwell Caldwell, regarding the unauthorized sale of marital property. I took a long sip of my beer before responding, letting the silence hang there just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Unauthorized? That's interesting. Richard, can I call you Richard? See, I'm looking at the property deed right now, and it's got exactly one name on it, and that name is mine. So I'm not sure what's unauthorized about selling my own house. I could hear him shuffling papers on the other end, that universal lawyer sound of someone realizing their client maybe didn't give them all the facts. Yes. Well, my client maintains that she contributed financially to the household and therefore has a claim to the property regardless of whose name appears on the deed. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment where all those years of keeping meticulous financial records and being the responsible spouse paid off in the most satisfying way possible. Richard, buddy, I'm going to save you some billable hours here. Your client didn't contribute a single dollar to that house. Not the down payment, not the mortgage, not even the property taxes. In fact, if you pull her bank statements, which I'm sure you'll do during discovery if you're dumb enough to actually file a lawsuit, you'll find that her entire salary went to funding what she called personal investments, which apparently included a secret boyfriend and a destination wedding in Italy. But hey, you seem like a smart guy, so I'm sure you already knew all this before you called me. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I could practically hear Richard's brain recalculating his entire approach, probably wondering how much of a retainer he'd already collected and whether it was worth pursuing this disaster of a case. I'll need to consult with my client and review the documentation, he finally said, his voice noticeably less pompous than before. Oh, you do that, Richard, I replied cheerfully. And while you're at it, maybe ask your client why she thought committing bigamy was a solid life choice. I hear that's still pretty illegal in most states. Have a great evening. I hung up before he could respond, feeling like I'd just won the first round of what was clearly going to be a very entertaining legal battle. Marcus called me 30 seconds later, probably because Richard had immediately contacted him, and he was laughing so hard I thought he might actually choke. Dude, Pemberton just called me having a complete crisis. What did you say to him? I recounted the conversation, and Marcus wheezed out, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. He's going to drop her as a client within a week. Nobody wants to represent someone in an unwinnable case, especially when that someone is also technically a bigamist. But the calls didn't stop there. Over the next 3 days, I heard from 2 more lawyers, both of whom called with varying degrees of confidence that slowly deflated as I explained the actual facts of the case. The third one, a woman named Jennifer Corso who at least seemed competent, actually apologized before hanging up and said, "Off the record, your wife is an idiot, and you should probably change your locks." I thanked her for the advice and told her I'd already changed everything, locks, passwords, PIN numbers, even my email address, just to be thorough. What really killed me, though, what made me laugh so hard I actually had tears streaming down my face, was when I found out through the grapevine, specifically through Trent, who had a mutual friend with Monica, that Clarissa had been telling her entire family for years that she'd paid for the house. Not contributed to it, not helped with it, but straight up paid for it with her pharmaceutical sales money. Gerald and Linda apparently believed they'd invested in their daughter's real estate portfolio. Monica thought she could potentially live there if she ever needed to. Calvin had been under the impression that the house was some kind of family asset that everyone had a stake in. Even Aunt Patricia apparently thought she had dibs on the guest room for her annual visits where she'd lecture us about chakras and Mercury being in retrograde. The delusion was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and suddenly everything made sense. The entitlement, the family vacation to her wedding, the complete lack of guilt or shame. They genuinely thought they owned part of that house, that I was just the guy who lived there and paid the bills while Clarissa generously allowed me to exist in her property. The audacity was almost impressive, like watching someone confidently claim they invented the iPhone while Steve Jobs was still alive. Marcus filed the final paperwork on Wednesday afternoon, and I met him at his office to sign off on everything. We transferred the remaining assets, 2 cars that were registered solely in my name, including the SUV that Gerald had been borrowing for the past 6 months without ever returning. We moved my stock portfolio, which I'd been building since before I even met Clarissa, into a new account with a different brokerage firm just to be extra secure. We even transferred ownership of our dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit. Yes, same name as the new owner's dog. Life is weird sometimes. Who I'd adopted from a shelter 3 years before Clarissa and I got married. The dog thing was actually hilarious because Clarissa had been posting photos with Biscuit all over her Instagram, calling him our baby and the love of my life, right up until she left for Italy. But Biscuit's adoption papers, his vet records, his microchip registration, all in my name, all dated before our marriage, making him legally and definitively my dog. When Clarissa's brother Calvin called me screaming about how I couldn't just take the family dog, I actually had to put him on speakerphone so Marcus could hear the meltdown. "You can't do this," Calvin yelled, his voice cracking like a teenager who'd just been told he couldn't borrow the car. "Biscuit is family. He knows us. You're tearing apart this family." I waited for him to finish his dramatic monologue before responding in the calmest voice I could manage. "You're right, Calvin. I can't do this." There was a moment of silence where I'm pretty sure he thought he'd won, and then I continued. "I already did it. Biscuit's at my apartment right now, eating organic dog food that I paid for, sleeping in a bed that I bought, living his best life away from people who abandoned him for 2 weeks to go celebrate bigamy in Europe. But hey, you're welcome to visit him. Oh wait, you don't know where I live now. Funny how that works." Calvin sputtered something incomprehensible and hung up, and Marcus gave me a high five that probably violated some kind of attorney-client professional boundary, but neither of us cared. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "Everything you've done is completely legal. Morally questionable to people who don't know the full story? Sure. But legal? Airtight. She can sue you. Her family can sue you. They can hire every lawyer in Manhattan, and they won't win a single case because you owned everything before she decided to become a bigamist." The real turning point came on Thursday evening when I got a call from an unknown number that turned out to be Elliot, the exotic idiot himself. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me, and I'm so glad it did because this conversation became the stuff of legend among my friend group. "Listen, man," Elliot started, trying to sound reasonable and diplomatic. "I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Clarissa and I, we're in love, and I don't expect you to understand that. But maybe we can work something out regarding the assets." I let him talk, fascinated by the sheer audacity of a man who'd married someone else's wife and was now trying to negotiate for property that he had absolutely no legal claim to. When he finally paused for breath, I asked, "Elliot, quick question. Did Clarissa tell you her name was on the house deed?" Another pause, this one longer and more uncomfortable. She said it was a shared property, that you guys owned it together." I laughed. Not cruelly, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. "Elliot, buddy, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Your wife, your wife who's still technically married to me, making you an accessory to bigamy, lied to you. Her name was never on that deed, never on the cars, never on the bank accounts. She didn't own anything because she never paid for anything. You didn't marry a pharmaceutical sales executive with real estate holdings. You married a woman with excellent credit card debt and a talent for deception." The silence on the other end was so complete I thought he'd hung up, but then I heard him breathing, this short, shallow breathing that told me his entire world was reconfiguring itself in real time. That's not possible," he finally whispered. "She showed me documents," she said. I almost felt bad for the guy, almost, but then I remembered that he'd knowingly participated in an affair and a sham wedding, so my sympathy was pretty limited. "Elliot, I don't know what she showed you, but I can guarantee it wasn't real. Marcus Hale is my attorney. Look him up, he's legit. Everything's documented, filed, legal. You married a fantasy, my friend. Welcome to reality. It's expensive here." By Friday morning, approximately 4 days after the great homecoming disaster, I woke up to find that my phone had basically exploded overnight with notifications. I'm talking hundreds of them, texts, emails, social media alerts, even a few voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. My first thought was that maybe I'd accidentally become a meme or something, which wouldn't be the weirdest thing that had happened to me lately, but the reality was somehow both better and worse than that. Clarissa, in what can only be described as a catastrophic failure of strategic thinking, had decided to take her case to the court of public opinion by posting a long, tearful explanation on Facebook about how her evil ex-husband had sold their house while she was abroad caring for her sick aunt. I actually had to read the post 3 times because the audacity was so breathtaking it temporarily short-circuited my brain. My sick aunt, that's what she went with. Not on a business trip or visiting family, or even the vague traveling abroad, but specifically a sick aunt who apparently required the medical attention of 7 family members and a new husband in Italy for 2 whole weeks. The post was accompanied by a photo of her looking sad and vulnerable, probably taken specifically for this purpose, with a caption that read, "Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. My ex-husband sold our family home while I was in Europe caring for my dying aunt. I came home to nothing. Please send prayers and support during this difficult time." The comments section was already filling up with responses from people who clearly didn't know the full story, offering sympathy and outrage on her behalf, calling me every name in the book, suggesting she sue me into oblivion. There were the usual, "I never trusted him" comments from people who'd met me maybe twice at dinner parties, and the "you deserve better queen" responses from her girlfriends who probably knew exactly what she'd been up to, but were committed to the sisterhood of lying for each other. I sat there in my apartment, drinking my morning coffee and watching this digital train wreck unfold, trying to decide if I should just let it go or if the universe was giving me an opportunity too perfect to pass up. Trent called me at 7:30 a.m., which was early for him considering he usually slept until noon on weekends. "Dude, have you seen Facebook? Clarissa's trying to make you look like Satan. You gotta respond to this." I told him I was thinking about it, weighing my options, trying to decide if engaging was worth the drama. "Are you kidding me?" Trent practically shouted into the phone. "This is your moment. You've got receipts. You've got proof. You've got an entire Italian wedding's worth of evidence. Destroy her, man. Do it for all of us who've ever been lied to." So I did. I took a screenshot of one of the many photos from her Italian wedding, specifically the one where she and Elliot were cutting a very official-looking wedding cake, while Gerald gave a toast in the background. And I posted it as a reply to her Facebook post with a caption that I'd carefully crafted to be maximum impact with minimum words. "Your aunt named Elliot? Must be contagious. Wishing you both a speedy recovery from your sudden case of bigamy. Get well soon." I hit post, set my phone down, and went to make breakfast because I figured I'd need sustenance for whatever was about to happen next. What happened next was that the internet, in all its chaotic glory, absolutely lost its collective mind. Within an hour, my post had more shares than Clarissa's original post had likes. Within 2 hours, it had been screenshotted and spread to Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit, where entire threads were dedicated to analyzing the drama. By lunchtime, we were trending locally, and by dinner, entertainment news websites were picking up the story with headlines like "Woman's Secret Italian Wedding Exposed by Ex-Husband's Savage Reply," and internet rallies behind man whose wife had destination wedding while still married. The comments on my post were absolutely golden, the kind of internet content that restores your faith in humanity's collective sense of humor. Someone wrote, "Bro turned heartbreak into a real estate flip, and I'm here for it." Another comment read, "This man runs on pettiness and espresso, and I want his energy." My personal favorite was from a woman who wrote, "My husband just asked why I'm laughing so hard at my phone, and I had to explain this entire saga, and now he's invested in the updates. You've brought our marriage closer together. Thank you." There were think pieces, hot takes, relationship advice columns using our situation as an example. Even a few TikTok videos of people reenacting the moment when Clarissa came home to find an empty lot. One particularly creative user had made a whole series about signs your spouse might be selling your house, which was both hilarious and weirdly educational. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers, some offering support, some asking for advice on their own messy situations, and a disturbing number asking if I was single now and would I like to get drinks sometime, which felt premature considering I was still technically married to a bigamist. But I kept things civil offline, which probably surprised people who'd witnessed my online clapback. I didn't engage with the media requests, didn't do interviews, didn't add fuel to the fire beyond that one perfect response. I figured the situation spoke for itself, and anything more would just be overkill. Marcus called to congratulate me on what he called the most effective public relations move I've seen from a non-PR professional, and suggested I consider a career change if accounting ever got boring. Then, on Sunday evening, I got a text from Clarissa. Just 3 words. We need to talk. I stared at those words for a solid 5 minutes, debating whether engaging was a good idea or a trap. Eventually, curiosity won out over common sense, and I replied, "Coffee. Tuesday. Downtown." She agreed immediately, probably because she was desperate and running out of options, and I suggested a cafe that was public enough to prevent any dramatic scenes, but private enough for an honest conversation. Tuesday arrived with that weird anticipatory energy that comes before potentially explosive confrontations. I got to the cafe 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and sat at a corner table where I could see the door. Clarissa showed up exactly on time, which was unusual for her because she'd spent our entire marriage being fashionably late to everything. She looked tired, like the past week had aged her several years, and she wasn't wearing the designer clothes and perfect makeup that usually defined her public appearance. She just looked like a regular person who'd made catastrophically bad decisions and was now facing the consequences. She sat down across from me without ordering anything, folded her hands on the table, and I could see they were shaking slightly. We sat in silence for a moment, and I realized I didn't actually feel angry anymore. I felt nothing, like looking at a stranger who vaguely resembled someone I used to know. "I don't even know where to start," she finally said, her voice quiet and uncertain. I took a sip of my coffee and replied, "How about the part where you married someone else while still being married to me? That seems like a good starting point." She flinched like I'd physically hit her, and then the words started tumbling out in this desperate rush. Explanations, justifications, excuses that all blended together into a symphony of accountability avoidance. Elliot had pursued her. She'd been unhappy for years. She didn't know how to tell me. The wedding wasn't legally binding anyway, so it didn't really count. Her family had pressured her. She'd made mistakes, but I was being cruel and vindictive by selling the house. I let her talk, watching her face cycle through emotions, waiting for the one thing that never came. An actual apology that wasn't followed by a but. When she finally ran out of steam, I reached into my messenger bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was every document that proved sole ownership of everything we'd accumulated: property deeds, car titles, bank statements, even Biscuit's adoption papers. I slid the folder across the table slowly, deliberately, and said, "These are copies. You can keep them. Look through them. Show them to your lawyers, your family, your new husband. Notice anything interesting?" She opened the folder with trembling hands, and I watched her face as she realized what I already knew. Her name was nowhere, on nothing, ever. "How could you do this?" she whispered, and there were actual tears in her eyes now, but they didn't move me the way they might have a month ago. I leaned back in my chair, finished my coffee, and gave her the response I'd been crafting in my head since the moment Trent sent me that first photo. "Same way you boarded that flight, with confidence and zero remorse." Her face crumpled, and she started to say something else, but I was already standing up, pulling on my jacket, done with this conversation and this chapter of my life. I walked out of that cafe feeling lighter than air, leaving Clarissa sitting at that table with a folder full of evidence that she'd never been as important to our financial life as she'd convinced herself and her family she was. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How'd it go?" I replied, like watching someone realize they bet everything on the wrong horse. "Satisfying." He sent back a gif of someone dropping a microphone, and I smiled all the way home. The aftermath of my coffee meeting with Clarissa spread through her family network faster than a wildfire in California during drought season, and the resulting chaos was the kind of entertainment you couldn't pay for even with premium cable subscriptions. I found out later through Trent's elaborate spy network, which apparently included Monica's college roommate's boyfriend who worked at the gym where Calvin had a membership, that the family had gathered for an emergency meeting at Gerald and Linda's house approximately 3 hours after Clarissa returned from our cafe confrontation. According to the reports, which I choose to believe because they're too ridiculous to be made up, Clarissa walked in with my folder of documents, slammed it on their dining room table, and announced that everything they believed about her financial situation was a complete and total lie. The fallout was apparently spectacular. Linda, who'd spent years bragging to her book club about her daughter's real estate portfolio, and investment properties, had what witnesses described as a complete meltdown involving tears, accusations, and the phrase, "How could you embarrass me like this?" repeated approximately 47 times. Gerald, who'd allegedly taken out a second mortgage on his own house to help fund what he thought was Clarissa's contribution to our marital home, sat in stunned silence for 20 minutes before asking the only question that really mattered. "How much money did we give you for a house that was never yours?" Turns out, and this is the part that made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my dinner, Gerald and Linda had invested $60,000 over the years into what Clarissa had told them was her portion of our property. 60,000 actual American dollars that they'd handed over because their daughter had convinced them she was building equity and securing her future. Instead, that money had apparently funded Clarissa's business trips, her designer wardrobe, and eventually her Italian wedding to a man who was now discovering that he'd married someone with the financial literacy of a lottery winner and the moral compass of a reality TV villain. Monica was furious for entirely different reasons. She'd been planning to move into our guest room after her divorce was finalized, under the impression that it was family property, and she had some kind of claim to it. When she found out that not only was the house sold, but that it had never been partially hers to begin with, she apparently threw a wine glass at the wall and called Clarissa some very creative names that I won't repeat, but definitely involved questioning her sister's intelligence and life choices. Beth, the younger sister who'd always been the sensible one, just kept saying, "I knew it. I knew something was off," while scrolling through old text messages where Clarissa had apparently borrowed money from her too, claiming it was for house repairs. That never happened. Calvin, who'd spent the entire Italian vacation posting about family investments paying off and generational wealth, was dealing with his own crisis because he'd apparently been telling his finance bro friends that he had partial ownership in a property portfolio through his sister. His credibility was now shot, his bragging rights were revoked, and according to sources, he spent 3 hours stress-eating Linda's leftover lasagna while muttering about how he'd vouched for Clarissa to potential business partners. Even Aunt Patricia, who I'd always written off as harmlessly eccentric, was reportedly upset because she'd been planning her retirement around the assumption that she could live in the family house when she got too old to maintain her own place. But the absolute best part, the chef's kiss of this entire disaster, was Elliot. Poor, stupid Elliot, the exotic idiot, who'd married a woman based on her claims of financial stability and property ownership, was now realizing that he'd basically won a prize that didn't exist. Word on the street, and by street I mean Trent's gossip network, which rivaled the CIA in terms of information gathering, was that Elliot had quit his job before the Italian wedding because Clarissa had convinced him they'd be financially secure with her assets. He'd given up a decent position at some marketing firm, burned bridges with his former employer, and moved his stuff into what he thought would be his new wife's beautiful colonial house, only to discover that his new wife was homeless, broke, and legally married to someone else. The family group chat, which I wasn't part of anymore, but somehow screenshots kept finding their way to me, was an absolute war zone. Calvin posted, "Does anyone want to explain how we all funded Clarissa's fake life for a decade?" Monica replied, "Maybe if Dad had actually asked to see the property deed instead of just writing checks." Gerald responded, "Don't you dare blame me for trusting my daughter." Linda chimed in with, "We raised her to be honest and successful. This is not our fault." Beth, being Beth, just sent a gif of a dumpster fire and nothing else, which I respected immensely. Then, on a Thursday evening about a week after the infamous cafe meeting, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately, Gerald's cell. I debated not answering, because what could this man possibly have to say to me that wouldn't be either delusional or infuriating, but my curiosity got the better of me. Also, I'd had 2 beers and was feeling bold enough to handle whatever lecture or threat or plea was about to come my way. I answered with a casual "Hello, Gerald," like we were old friends catching up instead of former family members connected only by his daughter's spectacular betrayal. "Son," he started, and I immediately bristled at that word because I was definitely not his son anymore, if I ever really was. "I think we need to have a man-to-man talk about this situation." I leaned back on my couch, scratched Biscuit behind the ears. The dog was living his best life, completely unbothered by human drama, and replied, "Sure, Gerald. Let's talk man-to-man. You want to go first, or should I?" There was a pause, like he'd expected me to be more accommodating or respectful. And then he cleared his throat in that way that men of a certain age do when they're about to say something they think is profound. "I understand you're angry," he began, using that condescending tone that implied I was a child having a tantrum instead of an adult responding reasonably to being betrayed. "But don't you think selling the house was a bit extreme? That was Clarissa's home too, regardless of whose name was on the paper." I actually laughed out loud at that, couldn't help myself. "Gerald," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm, "let me ask you something. If I came to your house right now and claimed it was mine because I'd eaten dinner there a few times, would you just hand over the keys?" He sputtered something about that being different, and I continued, "Sir, with all due respect, and I mean very little respect, you raised a travel influencer for emotional bankruptcy. Your daughter lied to you, stole from you, and convinced your entire family to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford. That's not my problem, that's yours." The silence on the other end was deafening, and I could practically hear him struggling with the cognitive dissonance of wanting to defend his daughter while knowing I was absolutely right. When he finally spoke again, his voice was smaller, almost defeated. "Can we at least get our furniture back? Some of those pieces belong to Linda's mother. They have sentimental value." I closed my eyes, pinched the bridge of my nose, and tried to summon any remaining patience I had for this family. "Sure, Gerald. You can have your furniture back, if you can carry it from the buyer's house. It's about 12 miles that way." I pointed, even though he couldn't see me, in the general direction of what used to be our property. "You sold our family heirlooms with the house." His voice cracked on the word heirlooms, and I felt a tiny, microscopic amount of guilt before remembering that these were the same people who'd celebrated his daughter's bigamy on social media. "Gerald, those weren't your family heirlooms. Those were items in my house that I sold as part of the property. If they were so precious, maybe Clarissa should have mentioned that before she flew to Italy to marry another man. Maybe she should have thought about sentimental value before she destroyed a decade-long marriage. But she didn't, and here we are." There was a long sigh on the other end of the line, the kind of exhale that carries the weight of complete and total defeat. It sounded like a man realizing that every assumption he'd built his worldview on was wrong, that his daughter wasn't who he thought she was, that the family unity he'd prided himself on was just an elaborate fiction. It was, quite honestly, music to my ears, not because I enjoyed his pain, but because it represented accountability finally catching up to people who'd avoided it for way too long. "I hope you're proud of yourself," Gerald said finally, but there was no conviction in his voice, just exhaustion. I thought about that for a moment, really considered the question. Was I proud? Yeah, actually I was. Proud that I'd handled betrayal with logic instead of emotion, proud that I protected my assets and my future, proud that I hadn't let people walk all over me just because we shared history. "Gerald," I said, keeping my tone even and firm, "I'm not proud of what happened. I'm proud of how I handled it. There's a difference. Have a good evening." And I hung up before he could respond, before he could guilt-trip me or manipulate me or try any of the tactics that had probably worked on his daughters for years. The media attention started small. A local lifestyle blogger named Jennifer Chun, who ran a moderately successful website called Suburban Tea, reached out via Instagram DM asking if I'd be willing to share my side of the story. I ignored it at first, because honestly, who wants to be interviewed by someone whose platform is dedicated to neighborhood drama and restaurant reviews? But then a local news station picked up the story, then a regional paper, and suddenly my phone was ringing off the hook with reporters who discovered that the viral Facebook drama wasn't just internet entertainment. It was happening right here in their coverage area, and they wanted exclusive interviews like I was some kind of celebrity instead of just a guy who'd legally protected his assets from a cheating spouse. I was sitting in my apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, working from home and trying to focus on a client's tax returns, when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Trent usually texted before showing up, and I'd successfully avoided most human contact that didn't involve coffee shop baristas or delivery drivers. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her late 30s holding a microphone, accompanied by a guy with a camera, both wearing the kind of business casual that screamed local news crew. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, but then I thought about Clarissa's Facebook post, her victim narrative, and how the only people who knew the full truth were me, her family, and anyone with enough internet sleuthing skills to piece together the timeline. I opened the door but kept the chain lock on, peering through the gap like a suspicious grandma who doesn't trust door-to-door salesmen. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled brightly, that professional media smile that news anchors practice in mirrors. "Hi, I'm Rebecca Summers from Channel 7 News. We're doing a segment on your story, the house sale situation that's been going viral online. We'd love to get your perspective, maybe film a quick interview." I stared at her for a moment, weighing my options. On one hand, talking to the media felt like inviting more drama into a situation that was already producing drama at industrial levels. On the other hand, Clarissa had already shaped the narrative to make herself look like a victim, and maybe it was time to set the record straight with someone who had an actual platform. "Give me 5 minutes," I said, closing the door and leaning against it while I texted Marcus. "News crew at my door. Should I talk to them or hide?" He responded immediately. "Talk to them. Control the narrative. Be charming. Make her look worse than she already does. This is your moment." So I changed out of my ratty college sweatshirt into something that didn't make me look like a divorced sad sack, ran my fingers through my hair in a half-hearted attempt at grooming, and opened the door properly to invite Rebecca and her cameraman inside. They set up in my living room, which was still pretty sparse because I'd only bought the essentials: couch, coffee table, TV, and approximately 7,000 takeout containers that I'd been meaning to throw away. Rebecca settled into the chair across from me, while the cameraman, whose name I learned was Dave, adjusted lighting and angles, making my mediocre apartment look almost documentary-worthy. "So," Rebecca began once Dave gave the thumbs up that we were recording, "you've become somewhat of an internet sensation over the past week. How does it feel to be at the center of this much attention?" I laughed, couldn't help it, because the question was so absurdly formal for a situation that was essentially a Jerry Springer episode with better production value. "Honestly, Rebecca, it's weird. A month ago, I was just a regular guy working in accounting, living what I thought was a normal married life. Now I'm apparently internet famous because my wife decided to marry someone else while I was home folding her laundry. It's not exactly the kind of fame I was going for." She nodded sympathetically, scribbling notes on her tablet, and then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened?" So I did. I told her everything. The 10 years of marriage, Clarissa's constant business trips, the photo Trent sent me, the Italian wedding with her entire family in attendance, coming home to a grocery list and an unpaid electric bill. I explained the property ownership, the legal right I had to sell the house, the decision to protect my assets from someone who'd clearly checked out of our marriage without bothering to file for divorce first. I was careful to stick to facts, to avoid sounding vindictive or cruel, because the facts alone were damning enough without me adding emotional commentary. Rebecca's eyes kept getting wider as I talked, and at one point, she actually stopped me to confirm. "So she married another man while still legally married to you. Took her entire family on this wedding trip, and came back expecting everything to be exactly as she left it?" That's the long and short of it.